Guys, welcome to another edition of Founder Wisdom Podcast, Neuroscience Edition. We have Andy Habermacher with us. He's founder at Leading Brains, managing partner at SCOAP, and president at Human Brains Foundation. We're going to talk about the brain, neuroscience, coaching, business, and everything in between. So, Andy, welcome to the pods. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your businesses?
Oh wow, yeah, that's. I'll keep it short. Otherwise, we'll be here. We'll be here for the whole podcast.
Right.
I mean, basically, I got involved in. I come from teaching originally, so I was in this space of engaging with people to develop them, and that led into business training and soft skills training, and then about 14 years ago, on part of my personal development journey, I met a Harvard neuroscientist. As part of the training I was going on, and I thought, oh my God, this is the stuff I really want to know about. And so engage very deeply with the neuroscience, and it's behavioral neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, basically how the brain works, how this influences behavior, how this influences thinking. I hooked up with a German professor a few years later who'd just written a book with his research associate, and that led to also a bunch of work and research and analysis, and hence the last, let's say, 14 years, it's probably longer than 14 years now, 15 years, I've been kind of very deeply engaged with looking at the brain, how it works, as originally as a non-academic, and then moving ever more deeper into the academic side, as well as just the simple business side, saying, how can we make this stuff, work for a leader in business, a person in business trying to do more stuff or better stuff. So that's where I come from.
Right. And what's the main difference on that neuroscience level between a CEO's brain and an employee's brain?
Huh. If only we knew that. So I think there's multiple factors. Now, I think we should say, an effective CEO rather than CEO, because a CEO in itself is a title, and anyone can have the title. Anyone can be thrown a title. So anyone can have the title of CEO. But if you say what's the difference between an effective CEO and employee's brain, I'd say there's two or three things. One is the ability to think in systems. So systems thinking. Systems thinking is a whole brain function. It's how do you draw in multiple areas of the brain. It's about what I call learned reflexes. On a learned reflex, you never normally hear this, but it's how I've developed the model of the brain to explain to people, is you develop over your lifetime some very refined reflexes. Basically, the brain is trying to operate as efficiently as possible through life. So you built up these simple reflexes. Some of them are very simple, like a shock reflex. And then as we build up through experience, we build up very refined reflexes. And an effective CEO has very refined reflexes. That means they can look at things and very quickly draw a conclusion from that topic. Third thing I would say from an effective CEO is the ability, and this is also just a cognitive ability and a brain ability, depending on different areas of the brain, to reflect and self-reflect, and to be able to gauge in hence deeper thought processes of why things are working and not working. I think those are kind of like a couple of the things which really jump out at me, from what I believe. Yeah.
Right. Been studying neural nets quite heavily lately with AI, and been comparing it to the brain, although there's good and bads in doing that. But as I was thinking and listening to what you were saying, my CEO brain and the reflex, I guess it's kind of hardwired. Some neurons fire faster and stronger than some others. And when I listen to someone, I filter their thoughts, their piece of data, that information throughout my brain. It works. It may work in kind of filter style if we could model it that way, but it's more kind of a net. a very much imperfect net. And when I listen to them, after I give them my opinion, some neurons are gonna fire harder than some others. Oh, I had this bad experience. Oh, I have this personal plan of mine that I'm executing, and this is aligned with it. Oh, this might affect your teammates and how. So I guess that net is already made. The weight is already there, and then I give them my opinion, right? That's pretty much the reflex you're talking about. And then when it comes to learning and listening, that's also a very interesting phenomenon, kind of open my mind. And the effects of doing that is kind of not associating any opinions on it. I might give my opinion, but I try to make myself more neutral to absorb more information so that my process thinking could eventually give better advice. Is that an accurate form to verbalize it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the neural nets, the network principle is quite simple. You're saying inputs strengthen connections and hence make the brain efficient on whatever it's doing. I sometimes describe, I live in Switzerland and I come from the UK originally, but I live in Switzerland. So I describe Roger Federer. When Roger Federer is, returning a ball, he's not going through a slow cognitive process saying, how do I have to hold the racket? What force do I have to enter into it? He can, in the fraction of a second, in a few milliseconds, make the right decision to strategically place the ball and already probably thinking 3 shots ahead. Thinking, okay, if I hit the ball over there, he's probably going to come back. Now that it becomes so inbuilt that it becomes a reflex, and it has to be a reflex to operate in the real world. To operate in the real world, it has to be instantaneous. And that's what the brain is doing. The brain is, a mechanism for creating efficiency, but it's also a mechanism for creating predictions of what's going to happen in the future. Now, the real challenge, though, we have, with the neural network principle is you build those networks. And the biggest challenge is this: the network builds a network that becomes efficient. However, that could be you get stuck in that rut. You can build one behavior and get stuck in that behavior and keep getting stuck in that behavior. So the real challenge is, and that would distinguish an effective CEO from a non-effective CEO, is the ability to keep changing and, as we said, keep learning. So keep building new networks or new predictive mechanisms and adjusting those mechanisms to build better behaviors over time. And that could be in sports, just making better, sports decisions, or it could be, complex decisions based on complex information in the market, or complex decisions to do with people. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to keep up on that topic, but just before I do, I have a broad metaphysical question. Do you think we think in the physical shape of our brain, which is round and neural nets? Do you think if we would actually modify the shape of our brain and modify how neurons connect, do we think we could think in a more broader, diversified way and not so siloed as we think today?
Yeah. Okay. What shape of the brain or not? I mean, I think at the
neuron level, I don't know how, but if we can picture, for example, a GPU, right? I mean, they somewhat arguably it's the same shape as the brain, but think reasoning, if I think and my brain goes in a bunch of directions, maybe that's what I'm limited to think into. And if we introduce deeper concepts, let's say quantum inside this, maybe my thinking would get quantic, so it is physical related to metaphysical kind of.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the brain, and this is, I think, something that's, with me has come over time, and when you get into brain science, the different people go through different phases. The first phase is, oh my God, there's these parts of the brain, and then you look at parts of the brain, you try to learn all the names of all the parts and how they connect, and you keep saying, what does that part do? What does that part do? And then you start to learn about the neurons, then you start to learn about chemicals, and then you start to, you go through these curves of cycles, think, oh my God, it's way more complicated than I ever thought. And then, oh my God, it's way more complicated than I ever thought. And then different things happening. I think I've recently tried to say, okay, we've got all this happening. You've got networks, you've got chemicals, a lot of chemicals, you've got a lot of processes within the neurons themselves. You've got mechanical processes, electrical processes, biological processes, genetic processes, genetic activation, deactivation, all these things happening. We got the whole brainwaves, coordinated brainwaves going across the brain. There's been reports of different, quantum effects happening in the brain, which we is kind of like surprising or unsurprising at the same time. Surprising because the old classic model turns to the brain as kind of like networks, similar to electrical networks, but it's been long known in various biological systems that certain quantum effects take place. So in that sense, it's not that surprising. That's
Right. If we
there's
live in a
potential.
quantum world, then we would expect quantum reactions
Exactly, yeah.
happening in us too, kind of.
In some way, shape, or form, something is happening. But of course, to what degree that's been, actually scientifically proven
Right.
or not is a different question. But I think, the fundamental principle of the brain, if we go back to the fundamental functions that, the brain is designed, and we underestimate how much is built into like an embodied human system to drive, relatively simple and complex, biological processes and functions. So, I think that the brain kind of has a purpose and the cells have a purpose. So to get out into some larger metaphysical side is kind of nice, but and this is where I'm kind of like I put a bit of a downer on some people. I have to apologize because some people go, "Hey, get out there." And I say, so much of the brain is around about just very simple functional stuff. I say simple, nothing simple from a biological perspective. Just a cell surviving a long period of time is an incredible feat of coordination.
Right.
We underestimate that as well. We say it's only a cell, but just a cell surviving is actually, when you look at the biology of it, it is an incredible process. And to have so many cells coordinating together into a human body is just phenomenal. So,
Yes.
I
So
think
if we
it's
stick to that, like yeah, I had a second question because I went a bit wild on that one. I don't know, you could imagine a tower shaped brain or like all kinds of physical models of the brain or whatever. It's going to be interesting to say the least, but that's far in the future. Talking about the present, you mentioned something really interesting about CEOs. It seems like adaptability is really important. Let's say that you're a Fortune 500 CEO and you change from one company to the next, totally different culture. You absolutely need to adapt quick. You need to break some of your mental models. You need grit in there. You need pain endurance because it hurts when you change your behaviors, right? And when you change your outputs, kind of. So you need to be able to handle pain and by definition have an open mind and realize that when you're with this new contract there, then you need to kind of put your guard down and pack in some punches and fortunately adapt to your new reality. Am I right in saying that? And also, like, second thing, to me it seems that these guys, they need to be able to handle cortisol quite a lot, because if you just absorb all the cortisol as a Fortune 500 CEO, you'll just explode from day one because there's so much, right? So am I right in these statements?
There's a couple of questions in there. One is the question of adaptability. The second, also, the question is of stress. And I'll deal with them separately because they're quite interesting, because there's an interpretation of stress and there's actually a physical manifestation of stress. And you mentioned cortisol, and what cortisol can as hormone that's strongly associated with stress. The first is certainly adaptability. Now, what you'll see, and this is why I talk about effective CEOs or true leaders or not so true leaders, and you'll see a bunch of CEOs which are kind of like one-trick ponies, where they're a type of CEO. They may be good at one thing. They could be turnaround CEOs or authoritarian CEOs or so on and so forth. So you get a bunch of CEOs who actually fall into this box. I wouldn't necessarily, they can be effective and they can be good at what they do, but they're not necessarily adaptive. I'd say what we're probably more interested in, and probably what the audience is more interested in, what is this real trick to being a CEO who can do that? And there certainly adaptability is key. But I think another thing there, and this comes also partly to self-confidence, and it's ability to judge. And that comes back to a form of empathy or social intelligence, because you have to be able to judge the environment you're in and make human decisions, and very quickly, do you push hard? Do you not push hard? Do you be kind? Do you not be kind? Do you give tough love? Do you not give tough love? Do you be forgiving? Do you be unfair? And to make those decisions, those social decisions as well, effectively requires an incredible amount of social skill. So yes, adaptability, to be able to say, now I'm in this situation, what works now is clearly of massive advantage, because different companies, different situations, different market scenarios, different market environments, different market dynamics, maybe, so without question. But it's being able to think of what is most effective and to keep that vision of where you're going, because it's not now, it's saying, okay, I know it's going to be tough now, but we're going there. So these are the things we need to do now.
Which is the super scary thing, right? Like if you're, I mean, you may disagree with that point, but if you're not like almost narcissistic or some type of megaloman, I don't think you have a chance as a CEO, because it takes so much guts, we don't, and no one knows about the future. And no one knows what surprise it has for you. Will your stock drop from 100x tomorrow because of this silly headline? Like anything can happen to you. And I think to have this position, you just need to have balls of steel or an irrational confidence in yourself as a CEO. It's one of the toughest jobs in the world.
Oh, no, without question. I mean, super tough. It sounds cool, but the more I've worked with CEOs and analyzed it, the more respect I have for the role and those real good leaders. It's super challenging. Onto that topic of stress now. I think that's an interesting topic, because the question is, and I'd separate stress from strain. There's two things. Strain, I say, is the quantity of stuff coming at you. It's like your muscles, they can take a certain amount of strain, and we have different capacities for that. Now, by default, if you're in the sort of CEO, senior leadership position, you need to be able to deal with high levels of strain. It's just kind of like a given. You basically can't get there unless you've got a certain amount of strain. Stress itself, however, is a different factor. And this is why what is stress is purely, it's purely subjective. And it's based on, this is the model we've worked with over the years, it's based on fulfillment of your emotional needs, basically. So if your emotional needs are not being fulfilled, you're going to be stressed. And that's always going to trigger a physiological response, which is then going to trigger the whole bunch of, physiological, psychological, biological responses in return, including the cortisol problem. The problem is if you do have that stress level, it's going to cause some dysfunction to the brain, or dysfunctions. It's going to change the functioning of the brain, because that's what cortisol or any of these other stress hormones do. That they change the function of the brain. We just spoke about being able to project into the future. Now, cortisol inhibits that ability. It inhibits the ability to think in systems, because if you're in a stress situation, it means, how do I get out of this situation right now? It's focusing, it's energizing, it's you're losing perspective. So stress is not something that you want. You've got to be able to deal with strain. You've got to be able to be resilient. And by resilient in the house, it means managing your emotional needs. So still feeling in control, still being able to create perspective, still managing your sense of self and self-worth, still keeping those relationships and still being able to enjoy what you're doing, even though it could be stressful. I say in stressful inverted commas, it's a lot of work. But as we know, a lot of work can sometimes be good fun.
Right, because to me it seems that there's a cortisol milligram per deciliter threshold that you don't want to pass. Basically, you want to stay under that, and as soon as you go over that, you're kind of in deep waters, and then you need to calm yourself down so that you have some adrenaline in you, right? You're kind of waking up. You're not sleepy.
Yeah, the positive stress. Yeah.
And you're executing, but once you pass a certain threshold, well, the pervasive thing, and I can certainly talk about this with myself. For example, one employee actually blackmailed me. I would think it was like 6 or 7 months ago, and took control of my accounts and so forth. And right there, right now, I could only think about that, right? Only think about that. And I mean, yes, was it good? Yes, because I kind of fixed all of it pretty soon with my lawyers and so forth. But then I kept thinking back, I kept thinking back, and I couldn't get into productive stuff in my business for quite a while. It would only be thinking about that, and there was a degree of micro trauma in there, which could be viewed as neurons being kind of severed, or me not trusting some class of people, which is very primalistic behavior, but yeah, it happens. And yeah, I couldn't focus on the future and doing productive thing for my business, and adding value. So my next question is, when a CEO is like under fire, and that could be anything, right? Could be like a negative press release. It could be a whistleblower employee. It could be someone hacking through shit and all of that. Does micro trauma exist in the CEO position, and then how do you heal that?
Yeah, so I mean, what we're looking at the first level, I mean, trauma, or micro trauma, as you've called it here, are different effects. But what we're looking at initially is a change in brain functioning. And this is the cortisol. So basically, you've got a change in how the areas of the brain are communicated together, because the area of the brain, and it's designed to focus on immediate changes. So that's so it creates a focal point. And that focal point, if it's a negative employee, a negative press release, the share price going down, or whatever, creates a focal point. So basically your brain is shifting the firing, and it's focusing on that. That per se is not trauma. What becomes traumatic is if you can't break out of that, and then the brain gets locked into a mode of operating, or keeps getting drawn back to that mode of operating, or you keep getting triggered. And of course, the general is the more intense, the higher the chances of that happening, because you've got a burst of chemicals, which we spoke about, building networks, which tend to immediately impact and build a network and strengthen the network. So well, I say CEOs, it doesn't really matter. It's for anybody, if you're going through, the principle is exactly the same, but it's how can you develop the expertise to manage those? Can you create the perspective? Now, one of the nature of a CEO, and this is again argued good CEOs, is because of the experience, you've been through a bunch of these things, and you can manage that because you've experienced it before. So if there's, if the share price drops, you don't go, there's not panic. You can say, okay, guys, let's make sure the company's got the fundamentals, and the share price is going to come up again. Don't worry about it. Now, of course, within that, there could be just very simple techniques. So we won't have time to go into techniques, but of course, we're going into then management techniques. How do you manage that effectively, to keep perspective? Because some of these are relatively simple, and they vary from just taking, 20 minutes each morning to focus on big goals, to meditative techniques, to neurofeedback techniques. That there's a bunch of things that can be happening. But I think we just have to understand it's just simple brain functioning changing, which we have control over to change again.
Right. Good advice there. In my case, you know, in that time, like you said, I blocked time in my calendar and I didn't let my brain think about anything but this goal at hand. So I need to send these emails. I need to write these scripts. I need to post this on my LinkedIn. When this was happening, this helped me. Even before that, the Stoic philosophy, right? What can I do right now that will maximize the greatest returns? Forcing calmness on myself, breathing, you know, while my heart was and the cortisol was through the roof. And there's a lot of fight or flight. And in my case, it's very much fight, you know, so I need to control that in me. And another thing that kind of saved me was doing sports, you know, doing hard physical activity, putting it out there, coming back and having endorphins in my brain and hitting a nice meditation, because I use my body to generate endorphins so that I could get back control of my mind. Because meditation is this, it's telling your mind like, look, I have the control here, not you. So that was quite powerful. And in my case, I mean, I've been hitting it from a decade, entrepreneurship and being a CEO. I went to various events, but I think the brain, it needs various of these hard events to kind of learn. And that, funnily enough, I didn't have enough of these micro traumas. I think that one was probably my third or fourth or fifth. So maybe now I'm developing this wisdom, you know, that you start seeing in CEOs, but back then it's just like total panic and you don't know what to do exactly. And yeah, most would really cower down in these positions, which is why CEOs is one of the toughest positions that there is today. But Andy, you've provided a lot of value today, so thank you for that. Where can people find out more about you and your companies?
So it's at leading-brains.com. Yep.
And also, yeah, on LinkedIn, Andy Habermacher.
LinkedIn, it's Andy Hab at LinkedIn. Yeah.
All right.